Oh, that we might have spiritual eyes to see that God is always at work, and even the tough things in life God uses to produce in us more fruit for His glory. As I've said several times on the channel, I call myself a 10% doomsday prepper. And one of the earliest things that I did in my preparedness was I learned how to garden. And one of the first plants that I ever put in the ground were 2 blueberry bushes in my backyard in this small little bricked area that was probably too small for them. And I remember I planted them and I was told I need to prune it. And I watched some YouTube videos, saw what I needed to prune, and what I learned is that I had to physically hurt the plant in order for it to produce more fruit. I had to cut off branches that would only produce leaves and not fruit, and that would then encourage the nutrients to go towards the fruit to produce bigger and better blueberries for my harvest. I always thought that that was kind of odd that I had to purposely hurt a plant in order for it to grow and do better. Did you know that God prunes those that He loves? That God will actually cause us to have discomfort and pain so that we might actually bear more fruit for Him. I want to tell it to you like this. It's better to be pruned to grow than to be cut up to burn. John chapter 15 says, He cuts off every branch in Him that bears no fruit. And every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes that it will bear even more fruit. It's better for God to discipline you and to help you grow more like Jesus, to have the mind of Christ and an attitude and posture of submission to Him, to have some self-sacrifice that needs to take place to love Him with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is better than for God to cut you off and throw you into a fire. This is why the author of Hebrews tells us that no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but it's painful. Later on, however, it produces in us a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. I've said it before that we ought to try hard things for the Lord. We ought to attempt great things for God. We ought to have grit and grind for the Lord. And part of that process is that God prunes us so that we might bear more fruit. And so when something happens in your life, if you really do trust that God's in control, you don't ask the question, God, why is this happening to me? You ask the question, Lord, how will this help produce in me more fruit for your glory? Oh, that we might have spiritual eyes to see that God is always at work, and even the tough things in life God uses to produce in us more fruit for His glory. How wonderful it is to be used by God. It never seems good in the moment. And if you're in one of these seasons of pruning, let me encourage you that God is not done with you and that God has a purpose behind everything, a purpose to produce in us Christ-likeness. It's better to be pruned to grow than cut up to burn.